Mimicry, loneliness, and the COVID-19 lockdown. With half of Australia and many other countries in lockdown from the Delta strain of the pandemic, I thought I would create this video to show to others how to deal with the onslaught of mental problems like depression, anxiety, etc., as well as just merely to pass the time in these periods of lockdown. As you can tell by the title of this video, I attempt to mimic people's voices. The way I speak now is not the way I speak normally. I listen on the television or whatever media or form of entertainment, such as radio, etc., and listen to the way people speak. The way they speak, their tempo, their accent, and so forth. Whenever I read, it could be an opportunity to read out in a different voice. But first, you may ask, why should I mimic other people? I will use logical reasoning or rationalizing to explain my point and not overload you with empirical research and facts and statistics that easily escape the mind anyway. You should mimic people because it livens the place up, especially in seasons of loneliness. The COVID-19 lockdown is one such example. These lonely times can call for desperate measures, ones that help to preserve sanity, a sort of defense mechanism that displaces your problems and hides it within the unconscious psyche. It is the fine line between sanity and insanity for the sake of self-preservation. You should mimic people if you have friends who are always busy, or if you don't have friends, or just don't have that many friends. Effectively, mimicking can create the perspective that you are talking amongst a lively crowd, even in times of dire circumstances and extreme loneliness. You should mimic people because it gives you another perspective, allowing you to see things from another point of view. This reminds me of the quote from To Kill a Mockingbird by the character Atticus Finch. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb inside his skin and walk around in it. Developing new perspectives can allow you to tackle problems through new approaches and new methodologies, leading to solutions. You should mimic people because it helps you understand languages and accents, accelerating the way they pronounce words phonetically and by the syllable. So the second question you may ask is, how have I learned to mimic people? I can mimic people, whether well or terribly, based on practice, like all skills, which people learn. I just imitate the way people speak. In my development as a wee little child, I copied the way people speak, just as all children would, I presume from their parents and peers. This is more pronounced having grown up in a multicultural society like Australia. As a teenager growing up, I expressed incredible anxieties, fears, and spells of loneliness. This may have been quite common regardless of the pandemic, as at this stage of development, it is denoted by self-discovery and self-determination, both of which were lacking in my situation. This is because I focused too heavily on my studies or academics at the expense of everything else. A lack of social life meant obvious coping strategies needed to be developed elsewhere. Talking to myself led to mimicry of others to lighten the mood, and ultimately it didn't seem like I was alone. You may ask, however, don't only crazy people talk to themselves? You're quite correct for mimicking. Does make it seem like you are talking to yourself, though no one else is present to hear it anyway, so it wouldn't really lead to ostracism if you are the only one hearing it. I would set the distinguishing line between sanity and insanity at whether these voices lead to the individualization, or rather the creation of multiple dissociated personalities. If they do, it is an extreme defense mechanism, according to the psychodynamic tradition, to protect the ego by creating multiple egos. The mimicry of voices in my case does not create multiple egos because I am a single agent that is purposely creating these voices for fun, like an actor or animation voiceover. Lastly, you may ask, how can I overcome the pandemic lockdown? Speaking to yourself can possibly lead to greater reflection of your life and towards your path of self-actualization is what you think I would say. Instead, I will take a more pragmatic point of view. as there are a plethora of negative mental health effects from the lockdown pandemic, such as the rise of depression, anxiety, social phobias towards others, OCD against perceptions of uncleanliness and disease, and finally a growth in suicides. Most of it can be attributed to the problem of loneliness. Of course, it is not practical to rely on your friends or loved ones all the time, and in many cases they may have to rely on you. Thus, speaking to yourself and mimicry of others is a way of internalizing that social relationship or bond with yourself, helping to create self-care. Its byproducts are that it will produce greater self-reflection and may or may not lead to self-actualization and metacognition or the formulation of positive goals. It does make it seem like you are talking to yourself, but I'm sharing how I cope with the mental effects of the pandemic in the absence of strong interpersonal connections. Like they always say, if you can't make new friends, you can always create a suitable substitute. If you have any mental health problems, it may be best to contact the medical and psychological experts that exist out there, such as LifeLine and whatnot. Thank you for listening.